Hello, everybody. This is Monica Oganes. I am hoping that you're having a great night. So I'm excited to be here with you guys, and I have Elvira Medina-Pekofsky with us as well. And this is the first of a number of meetings that we're going to have in our attempt to try to kind of close that gap between practice and knowledge of non-discriminatory work with our English language learners. And we have had a number of requests over the years, and we have been talking about doing this over the years. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background as far as, how we came to this, to today. So for many years, I am in Florida. I'm Monica Oganes. I have, a practice mostly specializing in bilingual assessment of children, families, individuals. But in my leadership role with NASP for a little bit over a decade, I was the Latino co-chair for the Multicultural Affairs Committee. And I am privileged to also be part of the leadership team for the bilingual interest group. And I am happy to see that some of our interest group members are joining in as we get into our training. So, it is really interesting that we now get to do this, because we have been talking about getting together for a number of years. And we have several issues that were addressed in a document that we drafted on behalf of NASP, which is the provision of school psychological services to bilingual students. We know that, we have a large number of children that are ELLs. It is growing, yet the number of practitioners that are trained with this population is not growing at the same rate. So we now know that it requires that all of us school psychologists get trained in bilingual work. And we're not just talking about bilingual assessment at the psychoeducational evaluation level, but we really are talking about from the very beginning, from the time a child enters the school, we really have to be knowledgeable in classroom level work. We have to be knowledgeable in everything that is required, before we engage in an evaluation that is more comprehensive. So as the years went by, we also found that there are a lot of people that are basically that are not integrated into a community that they can do consultation with. So we have either students that are being supervised by school psychologists that mostly practice or have experience with a monolingual population, or we have, for instance, we have practitioners that haven't really encountered working with this population, so they have not gotten training. So, regardless of where we are, I think that the idea of getting these online meetings and starting to do this really is to get us to talk and to try to close that gap and get, more into what we're doing and integrate our practice so we can really practice in a non-discriminatory way, in a way that is beneficial for all. So I am, happy to introduce my co-presenter today. She is a school psychologist. Elvira Medina-Pekofsky is a bilingual Spanish-English certified school psychologist with 34 years of experience. She has worked in New York and Florida. She has provided comprehensive school psychology services to public school children, families, and educational teams. She has extensive experience with diverse English learners, as well as monolingual students with and without disabilities. She is trained as a culturally and linguistically responsive practitioner, and she engages in a variety of roles within the school system and as an educational consultant. Her work experience includes a comprehensive assessment of children and adolescents, database problem solving, facilitation, collaborative educational planning, and facilitative coaching and training of school personnel and school psychologists. She is the bilingual member of a district mental and crisis response team, and Elvira loves learning and sharing what she learns with others. So Elvira will be with us you know, as we engage in the presentation.
So everybody else is mute, correct?
If you muted everybody, yes, but I can hear some people. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now I'm going to mute all. Can you hear me? Are you able to hear me now? Ah, perfect. I see everybody answering. Terrific. Okay, so good evening. I am very excited to be part of this presentation. I believe that as a learning community, we can all learn from each other, and this is a great opportunity for us to start very relevant conversations that should inspire our growth as professionals. So let's start right away. Let's see if I can advance this. Okay, perfect. This is our agenda for this evening. So it's in a short period of time, I'm going to try to cover several key principles. First of all, English language learners are very diverse learners. So we're going to talk briefly about that. Then we're going to talk about what research has shown, the most recent research has shown to be the most important principles for English language acquisition and learning, as well as research-based practices that can support languages, language acquisition, English proficiency, and academic success. And then we're going to, as we talk about this, we're going to talk about how do you differentiate when the student is struggling because they're not proficient versus when they're struggling because they have literacy learning problems and or a learning disability. Now, all these in a very short period of time. So let's see, let's start right away. Okay, so this is a map of the United States. This reflects data that has been collected by the Migration Policy Institute and is based on this recent, the most recent US Census completed by the Bureau's American Community Survey. And we know immigration is a very hot topic now, so we need to keep track of this data because it tells you which groups are represented among your English language learners. And this is important information to have. If you notice, the darker states are the ones that have the most English learners. That would be California, Texas, New York, Florida, and New Jersey. And what I want you to think in terms of English language learners are not a homogeneous group. Even though they may speak common languages, they're not a homogeneous group. So for instance, the information that they have gathered indicates that the top languages spoken by ELLs in 2013 were Spanish, 71%, Chinese, 4%, Vietnamese, 3%, French, Haitian Creole, 2%, and Arabic, 2%. There is a huge difference between Spanish and the rest of the groups. However, when you start peeling back, there are many, many, many languages represented and nationalities represented among our English language learners. Now, the real variations in terms of the immigration and refugee settlement patterns, so states that can be next to each other can have groups from totally different countries in their communities. Let me give you an example. We know Spanish and Hispanics are the largest percentage. However, if you look at New York, Spanish English learners represent 61% of the students. The second group is Chinese at 10%. Compare that to Florida, where Spanish speaking are 72% of the English learners, but the next group at 10% are Haitian Creole speaking. So here you have two different states where Spanish speakers are very high, but the second largest group are completely different. Again, take a different state, Montana. Well, the largest ELL group is German at 7%, and then American Indian at 3%. And then they have all these other little languages that are represented. Compare that to Maine, where you have 33% are children that speak Somali. And the second largest population is Arabic at 11%. Now, Maine and Vermont are very close to each other. Well, in Vermont, 17% are Nepali speakers. And then you have children from Ethiopia speaking Shostik, 10% of the population. See the variation? Now, let's look at Alaska. 40% of the English learners in Alaska are Alaska Native Americans. They speak Yupik, and I hope I'm saying this correctly. The second largest group is Hispanic at 12%. You wouldn't have expected that in Alaska. Now, Hawaii. Hawaii, 21% are children that come from Filipino and Malaysian background. They speak Ilocano. The second largest group is at 12% is children that come from Micronesia. So again, the point that I want to make is that just because you're an English language learner doesn't mean that you're the same. There is not such thing as a typical English language learner. They all come from different backgrounds. Even if they have common language like Spanish, children that are Spanish speaking in California and Texas are totally different from children that are Spanish speaking in Florida and New York. And you need to keep that in mind, okay? Now, so we know English language learners are diverse, and there are different types of English language learners. Let's quickly go over this information, and I'm using federal definitions here so that you know this is what is defined by federal law. This is ESEA section 32014. If you're interested in that. Okay, so English language learners are defined as students that are in the process of learning English as a second language. By federal law, we are required to identify them, to provide appropriate services so that they become proficient in English, and we must track their progress, their academic progress. Now, how the local educational agencies do that is up to the educational agency. However, we are mandated to provide supports and services. Now, the goal is to get them to be English proficient. So they are acquiring language to become English proficient. And that is defined as being able to understand, to express themselves, to read and write in English, as well as a typical child whose native language is English. So an English proficient child is expected to be able to fully participate in all aspects of life that include school and community, as well as a typical native English speaker. Now, if you have an immigrant, that immigrant is somebody that is not born in the United States and has not attended a U.S. school for more than 3 years. So everybody that is here less than 3 years is considered to be an immigrant. Now they could be limited English proficient, or they could be totally English proficient. Let's talk about what limited English proficient students are. Under the law, English language learners that are limited English proficient are experiencing difficulties in speaking, reading, writing, or understanding English, and they cannot achieve proficiency on state assessments. They cannot learn in a classroom where English is the instructional language, and they're not able to participate in their communities and society. And these are the children that are entitled to ESOL supports until they reach proficiency. Now, supports can be accommodations or direct services. So direct services would be a program like a dual language instruction program where they're learning their native language and English both the same day, all the time. or it could be a bilingual program where they're learning in their native language and then slowly progressing to learning in English, a sheltered model where they could be learning in English, but everybody in the class is an English language learner, or a basic immersion program where you basically place them with other English-speaking kids and you're just accommodating and providing supports. So which model is used in each district, that's determined by the state and the local agency, okay? Not by the federal government. Now, when you have an immigrant, their English proficiency can vary tremendously. So you can have somebody that has never heard a word in English sitting next to somebody that comes from a country where English is a first or second language. You can have kids that have been instructed in their native language and in English, and they're bilingual, but they're not fully proficient in English. So a bilingual learner can be fully proficient in both languages, but then they're not an English learner. To be an English learner, they have to be still in the process of becoming proficient in English. So they could be emerging, developing, or bridging in terms of English proficiency. So that's an important distinction to make. Now, you can have in that same class an English learner who was born in the United States. In fact, is the child or the grandchild of the first generation immigrant. So they could be second or third generation, but they are not English proficient because in their native, in a home or the community, they speak the native language. And so even if the parents are bilingual and are able to function outside the home is a Spanish-speaking or a German-speaking or a Chinese-speaking home. They come to our school with significantly lower font of information and vocabulary, and that is a dramatic language gap that has been shown in research to cause major academic problems, and we must provide appropriate ESOL supports to make that language gap decrease or disappear. Now, in that same classroom, you can have a Native American Indian or a Pacific Islander from Hawaii. And these children, as you saw in the Alaska and Hawaii examples before, they may be a small percentage of English language learners, but they qualify to receive appropriate support. And if you live in a state where they are a significant percentage of your English language learners, you have to become familiar with not only their heritage and their traditions, but also their language patterns. Now, in that same classroom, you may have a student that is called a long-term English learner. Those are children that have been in our schools for 7 years or more. They can be orally proficient in English, but they have not met proficiency in literacy. That means reading and writing. So of the 4 language arts, they have mastered listening and speaking, or they're close to fluency in listening or speaking, but they are not reading or writing at the level of proficiency that is required to be successful. They are not lazy, they're not disabled necessarily, but this is the group that gets referred to us most frequently. They're labeled lazy, they're labeled unable to learn, but a percentage of them will be and are disabled. What happened is they did not get identified because the teachers felt that it was, oh, they're learning English, oh, they're learning English. So they waited. So they're under-identified. And then you have some that do not have a disability, but never really got good services. So they may have been sitting in a class where English was always instructional language. The teacher was not trained to provide appropriate accommodations. They did not provide a plan and appropriate supports for the child to become proficient, and therefore they are now educationally disabled, not necessarily learning disabled, but they have become educationally disabled, and they are at the highest risk to be dropout and to be underachievers. So those are our types of English learners. Now, go their direction. Now, there are 6 basic language acquisition principles. The way that I cluster this is there is great summaries of the recent research. This is all research-based. So Van Patten and Williams, you see the annotation there, and at the end you're going to get a reference list. They looked at all the different studies and data and identified 6 principles that are essential for good language acquisition. I have 3 listed here, 3 listed in the next slide. So let's very quickly review them so we can then discuss them. Acquisition is gradual and complex. It's developmental. That means that you have to go through it in the appropriate sequence. So they need time to develop these skills. So they progress through stages, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. When you are thinking about students that are English language learners, okay, it's very important that we understand that development requires time, and acquisition cannot be, you cannot accelerate acquisition. You can support acquisition, but it's developmental in nature. If you don't have good oral language skills, those are the prerequisite building blocks for academic learning. So if you don't have good oral language, you're not going to have good academic language and academic success. So if a child has adequate native oral language development, that will facilitate the development and acquisition of English language skills. However, if you have a learner who is delayed in their native language development, that learner is going to struggle learning a second language. And you have to consider if the difficulties they're experiencing are not a learning problem, they're a language disorder or language impediment. You have to put supports in place in order for them to progress. So depending on the personal characteristics of the student, you may need to provide more support, okay? So since language acquisition is the natural developmental process of acquiring oral language, then language learning is when you consciously start teaching. The learner becomes aware and starts consciously practicing and intentionally gaining skills in that second language. So when Cummins put together the framework or the continuum of second language acquisition, he talked about basic interpersonal communication skills. Those are the ones needed for basic informal social communication. That takes 2 to 3 years to develop. You don't have to be in school to develop that. You develop it by interacting. Those are acquired skills. And then he talked about cognitive academic language proficiency skills. Those are the ones that you get and you gain once you enter school, because they are the language and the skills required to be successful in a classroom with school text, reading literature. That takes 5 to 7 years to develop. Those are the language learning skills. So language acquisition and language learning are different, but they're both required building blocks for language proficiency. So an example, you have a 5th grade class. You have a kid that has been here for 3 years. They have oral language. They have at least that language acquisition piece. You have a kid sitting next to that child that is here only 3 months, never learned English. That child does not have that language acquisition portion down pat, but they're still both required to learn with English as the instructional language. And those are the challenges of these children. Now, the other principles, okay, let me see if it advances. Other direction. Okay, so in order to support English language acquisition, you have to continually expose the learning to appropriate models. You have to provide opportunities to practice. So when you do that, you want to provide authentic learning activities that requires them to practice the skills that they're acquiring meaningfully with support from you, the teacher. giving formative feedback so that they can then become aware and start learning the language. So we rely on really good accommodations and differentiation. So those are the learning conditions we have to provide. Those are the accommodations that the federal government requires that we provide. And then also we need to use instructional practice that are research validated that allow them to then get the support that they need. So that includes transfer knowledge and skills so that they can transfer what they know, that they learn in the native language, to the new language. Now, if the language that they come with, the native language, is a Romance language or a Latin language, there are a lot of commonalities between Spanish, Italian, French, Romanian, Portuguese, and English. For example, car, carro in Spanish, adequate, adecuado. But if the kid comes from China or Korea or some Asian countries, there are no commonalities between English and those languages. Therefore, their acquisition process is going to take longer, and they need more explicit and systematic language learning because the acquisition is not going to be as easy for them. Okay? And I'm zooming through this so that we can get through the whole thing. Okay, so again, I want you to look at the bottom. The National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine just released last year a great report called Promoting the Educational Success of Children and Youth Learning English. And what they did is they went and they summarized all the knowledge that has been gathered and then narrowed it down to 7 principles that we should be following to make their learning successful. And then Diana August, who is the director of the Center for English Language Learners at the American Institute for Research, great researcher, then summarized all those findings for teachers and in an article that just came out in the American Educator magazine, and she reviews these latest research findings. So I'm going to refer you to those resources for details, but what I want to do now is quickly go over some of the suggestions that they provide. So the first principle is you need to provide access to grade level coursework content. Why? Because they need to pass those assessments. They need to master that content in order to be successful. So if I'm in 3rd grade and I don't master the material in 3rd grade, I'm going to struggle 4th, 5th, 6th, and so forth. So in order to provide access and to be successful with it, we need to provide solid ELL accommodations and solid ELL strategies. So these are some mentioned in their articles and in the review. So use authentic materials, local newspapers, current events, because that's what the children are experiencing. It's more meaningful to them. And then make sure that you provide pre-teaching activities so that they can gain the relevant background that they may be missing because they didn't grow in this community. So give them context. Universal design for learning it's a way of making sure that all our ELLs as well as our special needs students can access information in a way that is meaningful to them and making kind of leveling the playing field so they get equity. So if we look at many of the accommodations that historically have been listed as good ELL, ESOL accommodations are really good universal design for learning accommodations, and they help children that have learning disabilities or learning challenges also. So you need to make sure that the material is accessible and comprehensible, so you use visual representations, read aloud. Now that we use so many digital materials, this is fabulous because the kids can have digital textbooks and then you hover over specific words that have been linked and it goes to glossaries, it goes to videos, it goes to illustrations so that if they don't know the meaning of a word, or if they don't understand what's going on, we can embed tons of support information into those digital materials. Now, you should be using learning strategies that are known to facilitate transfer, like the use of cognates, concept mapping, linking what they know with the new material, using graphic organizers. All those are very solid ways of providing access to grade level content. Now, reading is a tool that is essential for academic success. Our children must learn how to read. I want you to when you go back, look at the end. One of the references is a material published by the Center for Applied Linguistics, and is called "What's Different About Teaching Reading to Students that are Learning English." This is an essential resource because it tells you how to differentiate instruction for children that are not native English speaking. It's at the reference at the end. So these are some very basic suggestions. If you're teaching phonemic awareness, it needs to be explicit. They need to know what the sounds are in English. Now let me explain to you why. Languages can be organized in a continuum of orthographic complexity. That means, how do the rules of sound and symbols are observed or respected? So in one end, you have languages that are very complex, unpredictable, where a sound and a symbol changes depending on the position in the word. And English is one of those, where we have tons of rules that we break for different things. So to learn to decode and to spell in English is very difficult compared to other languages. So languages that are on the opaque end are English, French, and Portuguese, for instance. At the other end are languages that only have one sound for one symbol. There is no variation. They're very predictable. They're transparent, predictable. At that end are Spanish, Italian, Greek, and Turkish. And in between are all the other languages. Now, if you're teaching a Spanish speaker to read, there is going to be some confusion between English and Spanish, right? Because you may have the same alphabet, but some letters have different sounds. The most important thing when you're teaching phonemic awareness is to make sure they understand that some sounds that do not exist in their language do exist in English. You have to teach those directly. And some sounds that they have in their language may not exist in English. And you have to make that very clear so they don't get confused. When you're teaching phonics, you have to explicitly teach that English sound symbol association pattern and the rules, and when we have irregular words and all that. So it has to be very explicit. Our children that come from other countries where the language has different rules and different sounds and different alphabets are expected. It's predictable that they're going to experience some challenges with these. The fact that they're experiencing those challenges does not mean that they're learning disabled, nor does it mean that they're not going to learn it. What it means is that we have to make our instruction more explicit, that we need to make sure they're not confusing and transferring what they shouldn't be transferring. Now, there are certain things we do want them to transfer, but not everything can be easily transferred, and not everything should be transferred. So it's essential that the teacher understands what are the language rules, the language sounds, the alphabet in the native language, and then compare it to the English. And always look, anytime a kid makes a mistake, is could this be explained by a transfer issue? Could this be explained by a phonetic issue? Could this be explained by a phonemic awareness issue? Now, in terms of vocabulary, we need to make sure that we're teaching them the essential vocabulary that they need to navigate instruction, that navigational language, and then also the content vocabulary. They may have the concepts, especially if they come in the end of elementary school or middle school or high, they already know the concepts and the skills, but they call it by a different label. We need to directly teach the labels so that they can transfer, this is called in a different way in English. Now, you may be teaching new concepts, so you need to make sure you're always linked to what they know already. That linking is very important. That to expand the concept, you need to link and facilitate, you know, the transfer of that knowledge. They need to have direct practice in oral reading. It's not like other children may have done that when they were in first, second, third, fourth grade. They may be in sixth or seventh grade, but they need to be picking up on their fluency, because if you're very slow, then your comprehension goes down. And then for comprehension, you have to directly teach strategies on how to derive meaning if they don't know the word, using context clues, using text features, using prior knowledge. And there are many ways that you can do that. And I'm going to refer you to that wonderful work of the Center for Applied Linguistics on how to teach English, reading to English language learners. Now, let's see the next one. Okay. I'm sorry, I keep going the wrong direction. Okay. So the next two principles are provide support to English learners to master core content skills. And that goes hand in hand with developing their academic language. I cannot master science if I don't understand the language of science. And it's important to realize that for academic language, that it varies across content areas. So the vocabulary, the syntax, the discourse patterns of science are different from reading, language arts, and from math, and for social studies. And even the non-linguistic representations, which are also language, for those are different. So we have graphs and equations in math, but we may have maps in social studies, and we may have charts for science. So we need to make sure that we teach that. That's part of teaching academic language, the non-linguistic language and the verbal language. And as they improve their academic language, then we need to make sure that when we're teaching content, that they become proficient with the complex grammatical structure used in that content area, with the discourse patterns, if they have to acquire the new knowledge and then explain the new knowledge or report out or write, they need to understand how to do all that. And these are some of the strategies. I listed some of the strategies. It's not everything, but some of the most important research-based strategies that would support that, okay? Now, the next one is building on effective practices used with English proficient students. Oh, no, we did that one already. We're going the back way. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, so the next ones are peer-to-peer learning opportunities. That is very important. Children learn from their peers, and they bring wonderful, wonderful knowledge with them. So we can have them interact with each other. They need opportunities to practice. They need opportunities to problem solve together. They need opportunities to comprehend the content together. And if we do that using a gradual release model, where we first demonstrate, then we have them practice with us there, and eventually we'll release so that they practice independently. That's the best model. It's called I do, we do, you do. So I do is a teacher demonstrating, providing that modeling. We do is together with some guided instruction, and then you do is when they're practicing, but they don't need to be practicing independently. It's best if you pair them up and you have one that is a higher performing English learner with a lower performing English learner, and then they practice together. And then bring what's meaningful to them. So by previewing the material, you can find out what they know already so that you can link to what they need to know. By providing translations and conversations in their native language, by linking to materials, like if they're in high school, make sure they have that text digitally in the native language so they can read the content in their own language, or have translation tools available. Those are wonderful, wonderful universal design for learning tools that will make our English language learners much more successful. Allow that interpretation, allow that collaboration, allow meaningful interaction, validate that that knowledge they bring. They're not coming completely without knowledge. They bring knowledge, value it, and use it. And then the last one of the principles is, it's very important, is you need to screen for language and literary challenges. Again, language acquisition is different from the learning of the literacy. You need to monitor that they're progressing, and you need to be able to provide appropriate supports for the ones that are struggling. So how do you do that? Well, we know that the federal government requires that we identify them. Every state has a way to do it. In Florida, we use the WIDA, and that provides you information. Then you use that data to match to support. So a child that comes and is almost fluent doesn't get the same amount or the same type of support as a child that comes out as being a beginner with very limited English proficiencies. You cannot assume because they're sitting in the same class and they come from Hispanic backgrounds that they have the same language proficiency. You need to make sure that you're using curriculum tasks that will give you information. So as you're teaching reading, many of these programs that are very well researched and shown to work for native English speakers also work for English language learners with some accommodation. So make sure that you're looking at that progress monitoring. If I'm teaching you the sound symbol associations and suddenly we get to a consonant group that doesn't exist in your language, I know, background knowledge, ESOL knowledge, that I need to teach that more explicitly and directly to you than to somebody that is a native English speaker. So understanding the language of the child you're teaching will help you to identify what doesn't exist in their language that needs to be more explicit in this language. And then I would progress monitoring that even more, because if they're not getting it and they cannot hear the sound and they cannot produce the sound, compared to another child from the same background with the same language experience, then something else may be going on. But not everything that is a challenge is a disability or a learning problem. It could just be an acquisition problem. I'm not here long enough. I have not been exposed to this long enough. You always are looking to identify and analyze if the instruction and the curriculum, the materials used, are appropriate. Some materials are not appropriate for our learners. They're not explicit. They don't define. They don't have text features. They don't have graphics. They don't have, videos attached. If the materials you're using are not providing all those accommodations that are required, then you need to work a little harder and provide those accommodations. If the instruction is being provided at a proficiency level that is above what I can handle, you need to accommodate me. You're going to have to do some more individualized work, and you may need to put me in an intervention group. Just because I'm an English language learner does not mean that I don't need tiered support. The need for tiered support in my case may be different than the tiered support that another child needs, but I'm still entitled to get tiered support. And what research is showing is that English learners that are provided intensive phonemic awareness and phonics support do learn it, even if they don't have the vocabulary and cannot do the oral expression fluently. They are still learning the sound symbol associations, and they're learning how to spell and how to decode. But then we can work on vocabulary development so that they gain comprehension. So using a culturally responsive framework is essential. We need to understand their background. We need to understand the classroom environment. We need to recognize when a teacher is not getting it, when they're maybe a little bit using some bias or do not understand well acculturation. So we need to be also looking at that. So I'm going to give you now an example of how we use WIDA in my district. So this is, the WIDA has a continuum. On the top, you see the levels. Entering level, beginning level, developing level, expanding level, bridging, and at the end, you reach proficiency. So you also see on the left, listening, speaking, reading, and writing. So they give me the test. I happen to be a level 2, beginning in listening, a level 1, entering speaking. I am a really good reading in my native language, so I'm able to transfer. So I'm a 2 in beginning, but I cannot write in English, so I'm a 1. So I can be all over the place. We have children that In listening, there are 4. In speaking, there are 3. In reading, there are 4. In writing, there are 1. You need to use this information to plan my instruction. How are you going to accommodate me, and what supports are you going to give me if I need to do complete grade level tasks? So let me give you an example. I have 2 learners in my classroom, and I'm going to call one learner A. And learner A is a 2nd generation EL, English learner, expanding listening and speaking skills. That's level 4. A second student, student B, is a brand newcomer, beginning skills in all areas. So I'm teaching a lesson. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the text on the whiteboard, and I'm going to read aloud, and I already have linked words in the text so that when I get to that word, I'm going to link. It's an embedded link, and it's going to show an illustration, or it's going to show a video. I'm also going to have the text with bolding or italics or underlining for critical vocabulary that I need to make sure that my learners learn. I am going to also embed some charts or some illustrations, some short videos as needed. So I'm doing this whole group. Then I'm going to separate the kids in small groups. I'm going to go and guide that small group with these 2 kids sitting next to me. And I'm going to guide them by using the gradual release. So I'm going to do the task, even using translation. I'm Spanish speaking, so I may say it in Spanish also. And I'm going to make sure that then when we're doing it together, I'm going to assign the portion of the task that requires more proficiency to my student A, and I'm going to assign the portions of the task that require less proficiency to my learner B. Okay? I am differentiating the task according to proficiency, but still expecting them to gain the content knowledge at grade level by providing the supports and the accommodations that they require, using the information I got from my WIDA profile. Okay? Now, not everybody uses WIDA, but everybody uses something. And you always need to know where they are in terms of language proficiency, not only the listening and the speaking, but the reading and the writing. Now, so we have a kid in front of us. They want to know what to do with the kid. Well, these are the questions I ask myself all the time. 34 years I have been asking these. So what are the characteristics of this English learner? Is this a newcomer, a long-term English language learner? The issues that these 2 children have, even though they're both English learners, are totally different. That makes a big difference. What language has this child been exposed to? Okay, only native language and some oral English, or both, because this kid was going to an international school and so was taught in both languages. And is not learning at the pace that would be expected for the level of proficiency. This may be a learning problem, not a language problem. Okay, so are there language delays or social communication delays compared to native peers? So I have this baby that comes from China. The mother is telling me, when I compare this son with the other son, this son is not able to express himself. Is isolated. Well, that's important, because if they have language delays in their native language, they need intervention as language impaired or language, they may have a language delay, and they're not going to acquire the second language unless they have good, solid language. Now, has this child been exposed to English formally or informally? Well, if it's informal, that means they're acquiring oral language, but they're not learning literacy. So what about if the child went to an international school where they learn to read in English and Spanish? That's a different situation. So is this child instructed in both? Or, for instance, we get students that they say, oh, they have always been instructed in English. But when you go and you look at the record, you realize the child was in a bilingual class for the first 2 years, where most of the instruction occurred in Spanish. Then they moved school and went to a class where everything was being instructed in English, and that's the year they're having problems. So were they really instructed in English all the time for 3 years? No, they were instructed in Spanish with some English as a second language, and suddenly they were transferred to a full English class, and now the problems are surfacing. That's a different story, okay? Now, is this child showing appropriate academic progress in the native language? If I was reading without any problem in 5th grade in Puerto Rico, and now I'm in 6th grade in English, and I'm failing everything, is it really that I cannot learn? Is it really that I have a reading disability or a reading challenge? No, it is a language problem. I have not acquired the language. I have not learned the skills to make me proficient. Now, is the progress consistent with the progress of other learners that have my same level of proficiency, that have been exposed for the same amount of time to the same good instructional supports? These are very important questions. If the answer is a no to any of that, then this may not be a language challenge. It may be a learning problem. As you see, each one of these questions triggers a problem-solving process where I need to go and find answers and discuss with teachers and interview parents and maybe work with the kid. Now, am I fully trained to do that? If I am not, NASP has many, many, many resources that you can tap into to get really good at being a culturally and linguistically responsive practitioner, so that you can do a fair assessment and that your interventions that you're recommending to your teams are appropriate. Now, we have gone through most of the information. This is the reference page. I'm going to now transfer to Monica. I know that, that some of you have, so I see some questions popping up. Let's see if I can transfer back to Monica. Hold on just a second. Let me see. Monica, I'm going to mute myself.
Okay, Elvira, I can hear you. You don't have to mute yourself because we're going to need you.
Okay, so I'm on.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I can hear you. So thank you so much, Elvira. That was very, very informative. And for those of you who joined a little bit after we got started, just to let you know, Elvira and I work together in our offices. She's at the Orlando office. I'm in the Miami office, but we share a lot of information, and we do presentations together. And I selected her specifically for this presentation out of the practice because she's very knowledgeable in classroom level work. And I believe, as a practitioner that has been working with bilinguals for, gosh, almost 2 decades now, that we really cannot be effective assessors. So a lot of school psychologists are asked to do assessment of bilinguals, but without understanding what is happening at the classroom level in depth. It is really, to me, the way I see it, almost impossible to be a good assessor, because it is really not just assessing to get numbers or to find information of cognitive skills or achievement scores, without understanding what really happened at the classroom level and what is happening with the child's history regarding instruction, regarding language acquisition, regarding language development, and all of those aspects that are important in bilingual work. So as we do all of these meetups and we try to address all these issues, we're going to ask all of you to give us, some information to, as far as, what is it that we can give you, what is it that you want to get from us regarding these meetings, because I think it is important that we get your feedback. But I think that we're going to start this meeting by doing, classroom level information, and we may move through the progression all the way to bilingual assessment, neuropsych assessment for bilinguals, and so many topics that we could talk about. I just launched a poll, like a feedback poll, before we go into the questions, just to give you some time, if you don't mind, to give us some feedback as far as, what happened with this training and if it was helpful to you or so forth. I also shared in the chat, I'm not sure if you can see the chat the way you have your Zoom meeting set up. I shared a link to a Google Drive where I will be housing all of these slides, and eventually I'm going to get a recording of this Zoom meeting, and I'm going to also put it there for people to access later on, because really our purpose, or the purpose of doing this, is that we can reach wide. You know, we don't want a lot of people. We have like almost 100 registrants, some people, because we only maybe less than a week ago we started notifying people of this training tonight, so it was kind of quick. So I have had so many emails and messages asking if I could share later on, and yes, we will. Once I have that recording, it'll be in this Google Drive, but Elvira's presentation is in this drive right now. So I think that it would be helpful for you to take note. I'm also going to share this link. If you have not joined the NASP bilingual interest group, go to the NASP communities, and please join the bilingual interest group in the NASP communities, because sometimes I'm going to ask some of the leadership members of the team to take over if, you know, I'm traveling or whatnot, that I can't host the meeting, but hopefully we'll do this every month. I'm also going to post it in the bilingual. If you have not joined the Facebook bilingual school psychologist group, I know that I saw Antonio. Oh, there he is. See, he just wrote. Okay, hi Antonio. He is actually the leader of the. He monitors the bilingual school psychologist Facebook group, and it's a great place to also share information. So we're going to share what we just heard from Elvira in that platform. So the idea, like, once again, is for all of us school psychologists to share information and to be able to have a place where we can get together and meet and share ideas and so forth. So I had let me see, I'm going to actually, we were not going to do this. It's 9 o'clock and technically the meeting is over. We said 1 hour, but I'm going to unmute everybody to give people opportunity to say a word or two. If you guys have questions, and if you have something to do, please, you know, don't hesitate to leave. This will be recorded. I do have one question that was sent to me privately, Elvira, and maybe you can answer while I'm going to unmute people. So if you have if you have noise in the background, please mute yourself separately. But they wanted to know, what do we do? How do we change the mindset of our supervisors to stop recommending testing, implying that all ELLs are learning disabled? And I know you touched a little bit about that, but changing mindset is really difficult. So.
Well, this is what I would do. You know, I would share some of the information about language acquisition and how long it takes. I would really look at the background of the child and the language of that child and compare. There are some resources where you can compare what, you know, the sound, symbol, the orthography of both languages, the syntax, you know, you can compare all that, the grammar, and I would bring that up to their attention that, you know, look, research has shown that for children that come from this country, this sound and this, you know, sound symbol association does not exist in their language. We need to directly teach it. That takes time. I would create awareness, and it's easier if you do it by sharing information that explains it, where the experts are explaining it versus us. There are many articles written by experts that explain it clearly. Now, the article that I mentioned, you know, from Diane August is excellent. Diane August's article is excellent. It's a good article to share maybe with them and increase their awareness.
Okay. So does anybody else have any questions? I think somebody, I'm sorry.
There is a question, Monica, there is a question that was sent to me.
Okay.
How long should a teacher wait to refer an ELL student for SLD? A child that has been there only 2 years and is able to communicate, but is not reading. Well, based on what we know.
I'm gonna mute everybody because I think we have, if somebody, hold on one second. I'm gonna unmute Elvira now. Okay, Elvira, you're unmuted.
Okay.
I muted because there's noise. So
Okay,
if anybody
so what I was saying is,
raise your hand, okay?
for a child that has been here only 2 years, they're at the acquisition level. They're not even ready to do the actual literacy learning. I would make sure that they're using a really solid research-based phonics and phonemic awareness program, and that they're being very explicit in teaching the sound symbol associations and the spelling patterns and the decoding patterns that do not exist in the native language with fidelity before I say they cannot learn it. That would be my approach. But after 2, it's not the fact that they're here only 2 years, it's the fact that you need to look at what the language of origin is.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that's helpful. It's
Yes. So let me unmute to see if anybody else has any questions. Does anybody have any questions? Oh my goodness. I think somebody, I don't know who it is that is making noise.
Fuimos allá a unas pizzas.
I'm going to
Sí, porque muy ricas. Yo nunca las había visto. Sí, tenía.
Okay. So if anybody has any follow-up questions regarding to this meeting, I'm going to, let's see, share. I think we had the screen, we had the one PowerPoint with, hold on one second. So with our information that we can try, you can send to info@monicaoganes.com. Definitely, you know, we can, regarding specifically to the meeting, somebody asked me privately if they had some questions regarding bilingual practice. And as you can imagine, Elvira and I are super busy with our offices and so forth. So, you know, as much as possible, we'd like to help everybody, but it would be impossible to answer every single question of like every issue that comes up for everybody. But we can try our best, you know, through this platform, through the bilingual meetups to try to answer questions for everybody as, you know, as we move along in this learning experience. But please send your questions to us, you know, keep looking at the next meeting. I don't have a date yet. We're gonna see the feedback from everybody. It's interesting, I'm looking at the poll as far as who we are, and the majority are district school psychologists. And interestingly enough, I'm the only one private practice. I didn't answer the poll, but I'm the only private practice person. But the majority are district school psychologists. But I'm, you know, we're like definitely happy to have everybody here. So I think this concludes our.
No, no tiene fotos. Tráeselo, Gonzalo, que no tiene fotos de nosotros.
Oh my God. Okay, I tried, but I think that everybody is, you know, not everybody's noticing that they're not muted. So thank you everybody for participating. We hope that it was helpful, and we know that the level of participants is so different. You know, some people are entry level, some people have a lot of experience. So, you know, just bear with us. Some information may be not relevant to you, but we hope that we can tap into knowledge that is applicable to the majority of you. But, you know, we have different levels, so we may not be able to do that. Do you have any other messages, Elvira, before we finish the meeting?
Thank you very much. And I love learning, so let's learn together.
Great. All right. Well, thank you again, and we will see you at the next meeting. Thank you.
Bye.